Who doesn't love a good drivetrain? Well, I guess technically people who ride fixies and single speeders. But sorry guys, gearing is the way forward. Why do we have gears? It's so that when you want to go faster or slower, uphill or downhill, you can choose the right gear and it makes life a lot easier, a lot more efficient. And one thing's for certain, when you've ridden a fixie or a single speeder, it's going to take its toll on your body, on your knees, and you'll probably be a lot more knackered. So for me, it's gearing all the way. And in this video, I'll teach you everything I know about drivetrains, how to install them, and how to maintain them. So let's get cracking. I'll take you through the whole system first, so you've got an idea of all the different components. Starting off up front, we've got our shifters. On the right hand side, we've got the cassette shifter, which is the gears at the very back on the back wheel. And then we've got the left hand shifter, which is for the chain ring, or the gears at the front around the pedals. And you'll see on here it's got numbers 1 to 7. Sometimes they're numbered, sometimes they're not. My left one is not numbered, but that's got 3 and that's got 7. So for each one of these gears, you have 7 cassette gears. So 3 times 7, 21. That's the amount of gears I've got. So on gear number 1 here, you've got gears 1 to 7 on here. Gear number 2, it's 8 to 14, and gear number 3 is 15 to 21. Hope that makes sense. You can get other sizes of shifters, I think up to 30 now, so 3 times 10, so you'd have 10 on the right, 3 on the left. And you can also get different types of shifters. So these are rapid fire, which means they work really quickly just by using this trigger. Or you've got grip shift ones, I'm sure you've seen those. So that is the trigger system. Let's take a look at the main drivetrain. This is the guts of the drivetrain. So starting from the left, we've got the cassette, the 7-speed cassette, 7 sprockets there that correspond to the 7 gears on my trigger shifter I showed you before. Then we've got the chain and the derailleur, the rear derailleur, or rear mech as it's also known. On here you see there's 2 small wheels. I don't know if you can just about see that. There's two cogs here. Those are called jockey wheels. Interesting little fact I found out about the derailleur today. First time I've ever known this, and I only knew it because I researched it for the video, was that derailleur always is a French word, right? It's always sounded French to me, invented by a French guy. Little did I know that derailleur means to derail. It actually means to derail the chain from one sprocket to another. I mean, it's obvious now I think about it. It's the same word, isn't it? But yeah, I thought that was pretty cool. But then again, I am a nerd. Up front, we've got the front mech, which does the same job as your rear derailleur, changes across the gears or sprockets. But in this case, they're called chain rings. You've got 3 chain rings at the front, and that corresponds to the 3 gears I have on my shifter. So that's the drivetrain. Starting off with the derailleur at the back, I'm just going to show you how that's fitted. There's not really too much to show you. It's that bolt there. And there are variations, obviously, on this, but for the most part, they're going to be like this. And what I'm going to do is just unhook that. You can take the tension off of the chain by, if I just turn you around here, you can see. You can take the tension off of the chain by pulling that forward and then just unhooking that, so it won't spring off so violently. Okay, that's your dropout hanger. That's a replaceable one. You can see it's a different part to the frame, but in the old bikes you never used to have that. It used to be part of the frame. That's probably because they were steel and they could be bent more easily back into place. So these are aluminium frames. So now you buy a separate one of these. If it bends, you just replace it. And you'll see like a little hook on the back there, and that's where this little screw sits, called the B-limit screw. That's only really important if you end up with a large sprocket and a large number of teeth on the bottom sprocket. Now I've got to pay attention here because you've got to be really careful. You wind it in, but you have to make sure that you don't cross thread it. So I'm going to tiff it all the way up so the B-limit screw can sit behind that, and just pay attention, pay attention. I don't care that I'm filming right now, I just need to make sure that I don't cross thread this, so I will not be a happy bunny. There we go. So hold it up, otherwise that screw is going to get in the way. Now I never adjusted that screw, and you may not have to, but what it does is essentially it allows this whole unit to rotate relative to this frame. So if you're in the bottom gear on this cassette and it's got much more teeth than say I have here, mine's 2811, so I've got 11 teeth there, 28 there. If I had, say, I don't know, 14 teeth or 18 teeth, it could be that when this, I'm going to put the chain back on now, when this chain is on, let's just get started. There we go. When this chain is on, you probably see there, those wheels are very, very close, and the bigger that sprocket is there, the more chance they have of interfering with each other, and you can adjust that by turning that screw in or out, and you'll see it move one way or the other. So if you take it around the back here, you'll see that that screw passes through the body of this and then onto the frame. So if you screw that in and out, the whole unit moves backwards and forwards on the frame. So that's the B-limit screw, and that's the installation of the derailleur. It's pretty straightforward. Now we're going to take a look at adjusting this and setting it up. Wind in the barrel adjuster on the cassette side shifter, and then wind it out again a couple of turns, and then we're going to make sure that the gears are in the highest gear possible, which means that it's dropped down on the sprocket to the smallest sprocket. And now we can go about loosening off this bolt which holds the cable in place under a clamp. Next we're going to do the same with our barrel adjuster on the back, just make sure it's all the way screwed in and then turn it out a couple of turns. I don't know if it's just me who finds this confusing, but just to be clear, when we talk about high and low gears, high gear, even though it's the small gear, is the one on the far right here. So that's because that's gear number 7. So I guess that's pretty obvious. It's the highest one, so it's high, and this one would be the lowest one, it's low. I suppose it's just because looking at the sprockets, I sort of see the chain as maybe high up here. I don't know. I just find it a little bit confusing. But anyway, that is the high gear. So they're going to take a closer look at the limit screws now. You can probably just about make that out. There's an L, right, for this bottom screw, and there's an H for this top screw. Normally they're printed on here, but not always. So this is the low screw, this is the high screw. We're about to adjust the high screw for the high gear to line up the jockey wheels. So the way you do this is you want to make sure that the jockey wheels, which are the wheels inside the derailleur, so you've got one lower one there and one higher one there, line up with the outside edge of the highest gear or sprocket here. So I would say that's not too far off now, but just to show you, we're going to adjust the high screw. It always helps to count these because I want to set it back to where it was. 1, 2, 3. Can you see the derailleur, the jockey wheels moving? 4, 5. That's moved that way in to the left, hasn't it? Now if I go back the other way, What I've noticed with these screws is that after a certain point, once they've backed out enough, you don't see any change. It's really only when you screw the screw right in, it starts pushing something inside the derailleur. That's why you notice it. So let's try that again. No movement yet. See that now? See that moving? Okay, so it was once the screw is deep down inside the body of it, it starts to move. So I'm going to have to back that all the way out. Not until the screw falls out, which it will do eventually, but enough that it's no longer moving, and this is as far this way as it needs to go, or it can go rather. There's nothing more I can do. All right, it doesn't matter what I do, it's not going to go any further to the right. So, and it was working fine before, so that is how I'm going to leave it. So now we need to move on to the low gear. I'll tell you one thing, guys, I wish I'd bought one of these bike stands earlier. I wouldn't get one of the side stands, but these two-pronged leg things are just incredible. Really cheap and just make servicing bike and doing various bits and pieces so much easier. Anyway, we're going to pass that cable through the clamp and then just wind it up until it's grabbing. And just make sure that you've got that nice and tight. Okay, now we can go up to adjust the L limit screw. So the next thing you're going to do is change up the gear to the low gear. I can't actually get that chain onto the top sprocket. No matter how hard I push the trigger shifter, it won't go because we've set that limiting screw too far in. And just to make a point, I do use a flathead rather than a Phillips. It will fit across these screws and it will make them last a lot longer. I find the Phillips rounds the heads off over time, and you have a very frustrating job of trying to adjust these gears in the future. So I've backed that way out now, like way out. So let's see what effect that has. So I'm going to try and push the trigger shifter a bit more, which I just did. You heard that click, and that's going over. Now if I keep my thumb on that, yeah, it wants to jump all the way over the back. So it's gone too far now. See? So let's get it back a bit. Right. So then we back it in again to somewhere sensible and try that. Let's practice up and down with the gears. And you'll hear it rattling and wanting to jump if it's not happy. So that's pretty happy. The final thing I want to show you is the barrel adjuster. This is your micro adjustment day to day, and you may find that your gears start moving out of whack as the cables stretch and things like that. And this saves you going through all this setup procedure. So just to give you an example, I'm counting these 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You see, it doesn't like that now. It's wanting to jump. So if you're finding your gears are doing that, you need to play with the barrel adjuster. So it's wanting to go up, wants to go that way, and jump off the gear it's meant to be on. So I'm going to go back 2, 3, 4. So now it's happy. So guys, that's how you adjust the rear mech. Now we're going to jump onto the front mech. Same thing again, we're just going to make sure that the shifter for the chain rings at the front, the barrel adjuster on that is wound all the way in and then backed off a few turns. And this again is going to be one of your micro adjustments day to day. Save setting all this up again. Okay, just a few turns out. First thing I'm going to do is to back off this bolt so I can release the cable and the clamp. Okay, so that's totally loose now. And then we're going to go around the other side, and this will allow us to actually move the entire front mech. So that's completely loose now. You can see that's got a clamp around there. There's various different sizes of down tubes, so make sure you get the right one for your frame. Rather annoyingly, there's quite a lot of different sizes. So all I'm going to do is just clamp that back on there and feed the bolt back through the hole. Pretty sure you can do that without me showing you. And here's the key thing, is where we set this up. Normally, when you buy a front mech, it has a little bit of plastic on it, and it'll be an indicator as to how far you should set it above these top teeth. Normally it's 1 to 3 millimeters. You've got a little bit of wiggle room with that. And what you want to do is make sure to get it roughly right, and then make sure that it has to be right in two aspects. One is the height up and down, and then one is how parallel it is. So you want to make sure this plate here, the outside of the chain cage, is parallel with the wheel. So you can only do that by looking from above. I don't know if you can see that, but I'm going to move that until it's parallel with the chain and the chain rings, more or less. It's quite a 3D object, so you kind of got to split the difference, as we say in the carpentry world. Okay, that looks about right. And then we're going to go back down, and we're going to put it at the right height. If this is not correct, it will cause problems with your shifting. Like I said, there's a bit of tolerance there, but you do have to make a bit of an effort. So I've just adjusted that to about 1 or 3 mil above the top of the teeth of the outer chain ring, and then I'm going to re-straighten out from above, try and get it parallel, and then I'm going to tighten the bolt. Just double check again before I do the final tighten. It looks about right. Now, similarly, we have a low and high adjuster screw. On here is an example of, it doesn't actually have any markings on there, but I think we can assume that the back one is for the low screw and the outer one is for the high screw, or for the high gear. Now the goal here is to adjust this chain plate when it's in this position to be within 0.5 mil of the inside of this chain. So at the moment, you can see that, but the gap is more than 0.5 mil just on the other side of this here. So we need to bring that chain cage in until it's much closer to that. So same like the rear mech, you've got two limit adjusting screws. So just like the rear Mac, you've got two limit. So just like the rear Mac, you've got two limit adjusting screws. They don't have any labels in this case, but I can assume that this one is low and this one's high, because this is high on the outside and that's low on the inside. And the goal of this is to ensure that the chain is only 0.5 millimeters away from the inside of that chain cage. So we're talking about this distance, or this gap in here between the chain and the inner edge of the cage. But to do that, you want to do it in the most extreme example possible. So that would be where the chain is on the biggest sprocket at the back, or the lowest gear. So I'm just going to change that over. And now there you can probably see that it's a lot closer than it was, but we've still got some way to go. Now I don't know if you can see, that's a lot closer than it was, that gap, but we still need to bring the chain cage out so it's closer to the chain. So I'll try and get, this is quite tricky on this bike, but you need a really dumpy screwdriver, which you can get, which I do have, or you have to find a way through. So that you can see the chain cage moving, or it moved at least, but it's moving in the wrong direction. It's moving that way, so we need to move it in, put the screw in, and that should move it with the chain cage in the opposite direction. Now I would say that is definitely within 0.5 mil. So now we need to replicate what's going to happen when the chain gets onto the big chain ring. So you just give the derailleur a bit of slack, get the chain up there, and try and recreate the situation. And then you pull the derailleur, if you can, as far as it will come. And from here you can then adjust the limit screw, the other one, to allow it to move in and out. This is the high limit screw. You see, as I adjust this screw, I'm able to pull the chain cage further and further out. It's quite tough, this spring, but there you go. I can pull it all the way out now. And if I were to turn the screw in, you see it moving? It's moving inwards now. I can't resist that. It's pulling, wanting to pull it inwards. But your goal here is, similarly like on the internal position, is to ensure that the inside of this plate here, is 0.5 millimeters from the outside of the chain. So I'm going to say it needs to come in even more. Yeah, let's give that a try. Okay, now we can fit the cable. Just hand tight is fine. Just dropped it back into the lower chain ring. They're simpler front mechs, but I've always found them a bit more troublesome to set up. Okay, so let's give that a try. It's a little bit slow to drop down. Seems alright on the top one. Right. There's not actually a lot more that we can do about that because this screw is backed out more or less as far as it can be. But this is how you do your fine adjustments now using these two. Could potentially cheat a little bit because these are not the most expensive mechs, and just bend that round a little bit or twist, undo that bolt and twist this round a little bit. It's probably worn over time as well. It's not too bad. I could live with that. I've messed around with these things before, and you go back and forth and back and forth, and you never end up worse than when you started. So I'm just going to change it down to the other gear. Now, it is expected that when you go to the extremes, you will end up getting some rubbing. So yeah, if you're on the outer edge of both the chainring and the cassette, it is expected to get some rubbing. But that's how you set up the front. It also, you kind of need to replicate reality and change gears faster. If it doesn't work when you're pedaling, when you're turning slower, that's not necessarily an indication it doesn't work. When you're pedaling, you pedal much faster than that. So I'm going to leave that like that for now. There isn't really any on-the-fly adjustment with front mechs apart from the barrel adjuster on the shifter. But to be honest, you're not really going to need to do an awful lot. Front mechs are a bit of a pain to set up, but once they're set up, you pretty much don't touch them. It's definitely going to be more of the rear mech. You might do some micro adjustments on the fly. Anyway, guys, that's it. I've taught you everything I know about drivetrains. I hope it's been useful. I'm going to be doing some more bike maintenance videos. Any questions you've got, put them in the comments below, and we'll see you on the next one. Cheers.